All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Wheel of Mind, a character point of view reread podcast dedicated to Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time series. This season, we're taking a deep dive into Moiraine's point of view. I'm Lajara Dane of the White Aja.
And I'm Giskell a scholar from Ilion. Now, to give you a quick spoiler warning, we can and likely will spoil anything and everything from any of these books. So if you've not finished the series, we recommend you do so before listening to this podcast. Now, today we're discussing chapters 17 and 18 from New Spring. And this is somewhat of a Halloween episode. You can expect some discussion from that toward the end of the show. And I know, it's a podcast. You listen to it anytime, but this is when we're releasing it. So it seems like Halloween to us. So today I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with our synopsis of chapter 17. Chapter 17 is entitled An Arrival. Now, chapter 17 opens 3 months. Moiraine has been searching up near the borderlands, looking for the Dragon Reborn, and her search so far has yielded nothing but boredom and names crossed off of her list. She's posing as a Carheen noble who's making sympathy calls in mourning for her own late King Layman. And right now she's in the city of Canloon in Candor. Uh, Moiraine is sitting in the house of a woman who has lost her husband and sons, and she's musing on the trouble she'll be in for her disobedience to the Amerlin seat as she listens to the widow tell how she lost her husband and all of her sons in a stable fire. The father had always been an unusually lucky man, but uh, this time there had been this horrible run of bad luck where he was out in the stables. The sons came out there and brought the little newborn baby boy as well. Somehow a fire started and they all perished in the flames. Um, Now, Moraine knows, of course, this is not the Dragon Reborn, so she is as courteously as she can. She leaves, makes her condolences, leaves the residence. And as she's making her way back to the inn where she's staying, which is called the Gates of Heaven, she spots two Aes Sedai in the crowd. She studiously avoids them, stays far enough back that they will not sense her ability to channel. So Moraine seems a little paranoid to avoid these two Aes Sedai as she does, especially considering there are five Aes Sedai staying in the inn with her. The city of Canloon is full. There are no rooms in the other inns. Um, and none of these are sisters who knew her. So she was unfamiliar with all of them, and they with her. They did sense her ability to channel, and through conversation had assumed she was a wilder, much as the innkeeper, Mistress Asher, was also a wilder. So Moraine is heading up to her room with the intention of packing to leave, and as she nears the staircase, she hears a familiar voice behind her, and it is two Aes Sedai whom she had not previously seen in the city, but who knew her. These two were Laurel Tarsi and Marion. Now, the first she feared that they were going to report her for traveling in disguise and knew that there was no way she could refuse a summons back to Tarvalon with otherwise sisters would be sent to bring her back forcefully. Laurel and Marion, through conversation, discover Moraine's ruse in pretending to be a wilder, coming from comments from the other Aes Sedai in the room. But before the conversation grows and blows her cover, another Aes Sedai approaches from down the stairs and takes over the conversation and brings them all to her room with a summons. This is the feared and dreaded Cadsuane Meladrin. Now, this is our first time to meet Cadsuane, and Moraine has seen her but didn't know her intimately. But Cadsuane was a legendary figure, a green sister who had showed up just at the beginning of the onset of the Aeol War, and until then, many sisters thought she was dead, thought she had passed away at some time during retirement. No one had seen her in many years. As I said, a legendary figure, a woman to be feared. Now, in her sitting room, Cadsuane begins ordering the Aes Sedai around and even treats Moraine as though she's a novice, maybe even accepted, orders her to pour tea, things that upsets Moraine, but she finds herself doing it anyway, simply because Cadsuane has such a force of will, such a strong commanding personality. Even though people despise her, they find themselves doing exactly what she's told them to do. She kind of deflects Kedsuane's questions about why she's there, with statements about a new sister wanting a warder, which Kedsuane just completely ignores and begins questioning Laurel and Marion about Moiraine, right to her face. Marion describes Moraine as Siowan, the friendship they had, the trouble they got into, and described the two of them as pillar friends. Now, embarrassed and even angered by this line of questioning, Moraine announced that she meant to leave, go to the city of Chaching, a detail that she had not meant to reveal, but in her anger she did. Cadsuane then rattles all of them by openly speaking of her own power and that of the others and other sisters around, naming at least 5 sisters more powerful than Moiraine is Siowan. Then she echoes Moraine's own thoughts from months before about the dwindling number and strength of the Aes Sedai and of the tower as a whole. Then Cadsuane deflects any questions by Laurel by talking of Moraine's misguided efforts at seeking a warder in such a haphazard fashion and in such a rough place. Her comments cause Moraine to sputter with indignation. She then orders Moraine to wait and travel to Chachim with Laurel and Marion, uh, forcing her to wait a couple of days with them, and enforcing that with a direct threat. I believe the quote is, "You can dry your tears upon that shawl that you believe makes you invincible. It does not." And this being a direct threat means Cadsuane was not lying. And thus ends chapter 17, An Arrival. Wow, not a lot of action in this chapter,
Mm-mm.
but still a lot of depth to it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not so much from Moiraine. We don't see her character growing that much. We don't see a lot of changes or pivotal moments for her, except the fear that she has. As Cadsuane rightly pointed out, Moraine did have a sense of invincibility. She had the one power. She was a full Aes Sedai. She could do whatever she wanted until the tower caught up with her where she was for defying a direct order of the Amerlin.
Mm.
Uh, Yet, I think as anyone young in a position of power and influence, um, she's trying to be careful, but she's just not quite worldly enough to pull that off in a good manner.
Yeah, I'm actually shocked that she doesn't seem to feel more afraid traveling alone. I mean, she does have the power, but I think they've had it drilled into them, like when they started on their work going out into the camps in the very beginning of the book, that a white cloak's arrow in your heart will kill you same as anybody else.
Exactly.
Um,
Uh,
yeah.
Cad Swain said very similar things to her about the way she was looking for a warder. In fact, even pointing out, you're lucky if you don't wake up with a bump on the head and your purse missing, as well as some other things, and kind of a
Mm,
suggestive or lewd nature there. And even kind of pointed out, I don't think that would be the way you wanted to choose your first man,
mm,
much less your first warder. And of course, with Moraine's uh, puritanical views, you just don't talk about anything sexual. That's what caused her to splutter with indignation. She could not process that. She could not handle that line of questioning, and
mm-hmm.
couldn't continue it. That was something that was far beyond her ability to discuss.
Yeah, Catsuane is certainly uh, doesn't beat around the bush with any Game of Houses type subtleties. She tends to just tell it like it is. And I don't know if this is a function of her age and power, so that puts her in such high standing, or if she's maybe, I don't know if she's always been such a maverick, but it seems like she's the only person who can get away with this stuff. She knows just how to push
Yes,
everybody's buttons. She knows all the things you're not supposed to say, and she says them anyway to get a point across, because nobody's talking about the things that she is. I mean, Moiraine does need a little bit of a wake-up call, and I mean, people do need to be thinking about the problem of the power and the numbers dwindling in the tower and those types of
right.
things. But her methods never really seem to work out. So she's introduced in New Spring, if we're thinking chronological order of when this was published, after she's already been introduced in book 7, because
Yes,
New Spring was published between books 10 and 11. So we see that when she goes to guide Rand, she takes this exact same brash approach, and he obviously doesn't take to any of it, and all of it backfires
right.
essentially. And Sometimes I think Cadsuane was in the story with Rand to show us what would have happened if any other Aes Sedai other than Moiraine had been the one to originally find and start mentoring him.
Yes.
Because they all kind of would have this attitude of superiority over a man in the first place, over a man who can channel, who they think of as disgusting anyway. And I think Cadsuane is almost just like an extreme version of how Aes Sedai think they can push other people around.
Right. Yes, I feel the same way that Cadsuane is kind of the counterpoint to Moraine. We see what happened with Alana, who thought she could bond him as a warder and
Mm-hmm.
seek some level of control there. We see Cadsuane, who can take a direct method. Just as I said, her force of personality, because she is a force to be reckoned with. She's a very powerful woman, and she knows it. And yet we see that Rand cannot be pushed. He
Right.
can be befriended, he can be influenced, he can be led to a point with logic or reasoning, but not for your ends, only for his own. Um, and even then, he's very secretive and kind of keeps things to himself. But he cannot and will not be pushed. In fact, it's one of the things I admire about him is his stubbornness. Sometimes it makes you want to throttle him,
Yeah.
but again, it's one of the things I admire about Rand is his stubbornness. So I believe she's very much a counterpoint to Moiraine. Moiraine was, as we've said before, the person who needed to find Rand. And even she found very quickly she couldn't push him too much. And
Mm-hmm.
so she tries to take an entirely different tack, which is the only one that will work with him. And yeah, we've shown example after example of what does not work. And Cadsuane
Yeah.
is one of those examples, even though she had his best interest at heart
Mm-hmm.
and the interest of all peoples. But I think Cadsuane, this is part of her personality. It's probably something that's developed over time. We see almost everywhere as people age, they sometimes get to the point they don't give a crap what people think.
Yeah.
And so they do say things they would not have said earlier or at a younger age. Yet with Cadsuane, I think it's more purposeful. She
Mm.
says things to push people's buttons, so she doesn't have. It almost is like she's playing Destimar, but not the way everybody else plays it.
Yeah.
Rather than subtly trying to get people to do what she wants, she just comes right out and says something that's completely against their custom, against whatever pushes their buttons, whatever sets them off and angers them or upsets them or gets them indignant. And that at that point, she's controlling their emotions and she's controlling the conversation. And you notice anytime here and anytime anywhere in the series, someone asks her a direct question, she will do that. If it's something she doesn't want to answer, she comes right out and she says something to embarrass them or anger them,
Mm.
and they stop the line of questioning because now they're defensive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of a shame that she sets everyone on edge and keeps everyone defensive, yet that always keeps her on the offensive. She's always trying to control everyone around her that way. So she does it differently from other people, but it's still a very Aes Sedai thing. She's just
Mm-hmm.
kind of learned her own technique of doing it,
Mm. Yeah.
sidestepping direct questions, always deflecting, always changing, but in a totally different way, just by like just setting everybody off.
Yeah.
But that's part of why they respect her because they fear her. They've never walked away from a conversation feeling like they won, much less walking away from an argument with her
Mm-hmm.
feeling like they won.
Yeah, this must have worked for her in the past for her to continue to use this aggressive form of manipulation. I mean, they talk about some of the legends that she has allegedly, gotten two warring kings and basically knocked their heads together and locked them in a room until they made peace.
Yes, yes.
um,
Kidnapped a couple of different world leaders or
yeah.
leaders of countries, and um, you know, made some changes there. So, uh, and evidently, probably kept them on edge until they realized they couldn't do anything with her. They needed to listen. In fact,
Yeah.
I imagine that's worked with everyone, no matter how stubborn, until she met Rand al'Thor, and his. Oh my goodness, it's almost like an Appalachian hillbilly stubbornness that he exhibits.
Yeah.
Although he's very intellectual and very intelligent and all the things that you don't normally associate with that, but just that stubborn streak that I admire about him and wish I could change about him at the same time.
Yeah.
Uh, Now, as well, one of the things I loved about this chapter, not the order that in which the books were published, but going through them chronologically, this is the first time we see the phrase "sure as peaches are poison."
Oh, yeah.
That's what Moiraine says when she's just meets Laurel and Miriam there, and she's thinking in her mind, okay, if they don't tell why I'm here, and it gets back to the island, there'll be a summons that I cannot deny. Otherwise, all these other sisters are going to come after me, bring me back forcefully, as sure as peaches are poison. It's one of those things that threw me off the first reading through this series.
Mm.
And at first, I was thinking maybe that's just a wives' tale. Maybe in their world, there's this wives' tale that peaches are poison, and we know they're really not. But
Yeah. Like
mm,
tomatoes used to be thought of as poisonous in ancient
exactly,
Rome. Yeah.
exactly. Yet it really seems to be something poisonous in this
Yeah.
turning of the wheel. It's just a different thing, something different from what we have in our world today.
Yeah, it adds some kind of interesting color to the world building. I really like that
Yes,
point. Um, I do think I've read somewhere that there's a small amount of, I think maybe it's cyanide in peach pits, kind of like there is in apple cores too.
yes. Mhm.
And so Robert Jordan intentionally thought, well, maybe this is just a world where that kind of evolved. Peach trees just evolved to make more and more of that, and so
Yeah,
peaches are poison in this world.
yeah.
But the saying sounds so natural.
It
It sounds
does.
like it fits really well. I don't know if it just does with our sort of southern accents, but it just sounds like something I could hear somebody organically saying
Yes,
until I
yes.
think about it. Wait, peaches aren't poison.
Right. Yeah, and that's I think one thing that threw me off because in the story, like you said, it sounds so natural. Part of it may be that there's almost a cadence or a rhyme to the words.
Mm-hmm.
It sure as peaches are poison. Yet it just seems to flow. It
It
just
does.
seems so natural. It's something we know is not true. So I see this, in fact, the name of the chapter, An Arrival, referring to, of course, in one sense, Moiraine. She is not just arrived here, but we catch up with her on her journey at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's an arrival of Cadsuane into the story and into Moraine's life, but it's also an arrival of this saying, peaches poison. And another thing, we're introduced here, again, if we're just going through this chronologically, to the concept of Taverin.
Mm-hmm.
It's not spelled out. She never uses the
Mm.
phrase, but and she doesn't even really think about it. But we, the reader, as we find her in the living room or sitting room of of this widow who's just lost her husband, and she goes into a description of how he's always been lucky. He's always been unnaturally lucky,
Mm-hmm.
and even going off to the war, she never was afraid for him because of his unnatural luck. Basically, you could just almost picture people dying all around him, yet he's unscathed and comes out without a scratch on him. And in all of his life, it seems like everything's kind of bent around him in a Tavern style until this point when the pattern, bends completely against him, as
Mm-hmm.
it sometimes will with Tavern. It doesn't always mean that things bend toward their luck, but the pattern weaves itself around them in a different way
Right.
than it does many people. So, of course, we learn this when Moraine explains it later to the
Mm-hmm.
boys from the Two Rivers. But um, still, we the readers see this where Moraine, I don't know if she's not even familiar with it at this point or didn't
Mm.
think about it. She doesn't muse on it. It's just we the readers, as we experience what the widow's talking about, and we get a sense that perhaps that's an arrival of this concept into the story.
Yes, I wonder if, the pattern has sort of people picked out to be potential important roles in terms of end game type thing.
Yes.
Um, I think that maybe this guy was a potential father to the dragon, and when the pattern maybe the pattern has many of these potential ones, like, and if one of them works out, all of the other threads get cut off.
I
So
never looked at it that way, but that's very, very good possibility. Maybe there were, for instance, some things in Rand's life that could have ended it early, and when it
right.
didn't, then yeah, like you said, the wheel kind of snips the other threads out of the pattern. Or
Yeah.
perhaps it's just the nature of Tavern to change the threads around them strangely in ways we don't understand. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we don't know. Of course, the first suggests intelligence and intent of the weaving. The second
Mm.
is more of a random force of nature of the weaving, and we don't know. That's one of the beautiful things about it. Everybody can take a different meaning from it and still feel comfortable with it in their own worldview. Um, but of course, I kind of lean more toward or find more comfort in the fact there is intent and will and design in people's lives and in the
Mm.
lives of these characters. That again, Moiraine was meant to be the Aes Sedai to help Rand. That Rand was meant to be the Dragon Reborn. He was meant to be the one to face Shaitan at the Tarman Gate on. But this is how it's designed to be, and everything leads up to it. But even for those who just kind of feel uncomfortable with that concept, the story's written where you can have your own take on it
Yeah.
and still feel like you're a part of it and you're there because it fits into your own worldview of things.
Yeah.
One of the things that makes this a masterfully built story.
It really does. There are so many ways to read this. And like you said, so many ways to feel that you're kind of seamlessly a part of the world.
Yes.
I think another way of viewing this also, so I thought about the Taviran issue. I thought, was this man Taviran? Was this man's life affected by Rand's, astronomical Taviranness already in existence? Um, but I also wondered if this man just happened to have good luck that maybe wasn't necessarily Taviran luck. And that was meant to throw up our suspicion when we hear that something bad has happened to him, that
Ah.
maybe the Black Aja has the same list of names and they went and took out this potential dragon intentionally.
Oh, never thought of that. Um,
I kind of like
yeah.
the Taviran part a little bit more, but
Yeah.
this was another thing that popped into my mind. I think the first time I read it, at least.
Yes. Yes. Especially when we get into the next chapter where this idea is introduced. Up until now, we haven't really been shown much of anything or even mentioned the Black Aja in
Mm-hmm.
existence. But that's intriguing. I had never considered that. I think that's worthy of all of us to kind of pause and imagine where that which of that is. Is it a turning of the wheel? Is it the twisting of the Tavarian power, or is it the intent of evil people?
Mm. I think that segues us well into chapter 18, unless you have anything else on 17 you want to talk about.
No, I think we've covered it.
Okay. So chapter 18 is called A Narrow Passage. Moiraine heads back into the common room after this encounter with Cadsuane and Miriam and Lorella, hoping that no one else knows what happened and that word of her whereabouts will not get back to Siren. She wishes for Siwan's steadying presence and actually sees a woman peek into the doorway and run away. She's like, well, you wish for a thing and you might just actually see it. But then she follows up and finds, no, that was Siwan. So she chases her, worried that Siwan maybe had to have left in defiance as she herself did, because she wouldn't be powerful enough for a few more years to defy Satalia, who had been asking her to do eyes and ear work. So she catches up to Siwan in an alley, and to Moiraine's shock, Siwan breaks down crying when Moiraine tells her that she's not found the boy they're looking for. All the searchers that they knew of are now dead through freak accidents, it seems. Aisha, Karine, Valera, Ludis, and Malin. Siwan is sure all the deaths were foul play. When Malin mysteriously returned to the tower not long after Karine's death, Siwan wanted to talk to her, so she hid under Malin's bed to be unnoticed by the servants and stayed there most of the night. The bed was never slept in, and she snuck back out to have breakfast, where she heard the announcement that Malin had been found dead in her bed and had died during the night, apparently, which was obviously untrue. According to the autopsy by the Yellows, she had no marks on her or any other signs, so they declared it a natural death, but Siwan reasons it had to have been done with the power. So Siwan spills what she's puzzled out. Somebody got curious about why Tamara was summoning these women, probably also suspicious about the whole bounty thing. They used the power to torture and get answers out of her, and then killed her to cover up what they had done, which was obviously a violation of the three oaths and not something they could just get away with. Most importantly, now that they knew about the search for the Dragon Reborn, they had been sabotaging that search. They do not want the dragon at the last battle, so they must be Black Aja. Siwan left a warning note about this um, to the Amerlin before she left, and Moiraine recounts her encounter with Miriam, Lorella, and Cadsuane at the inn. And they think together, okay, maybe any of these three could be either Black Aja or one of the searchers, and there's no way for us to tell the difference. It seems like they know too much, and we don't know on which side. Siwan goes ahead on the road to Chachin to continue their search separately, and Moiraine will continue in the morning. Back at the inn, Moiraine notices men going into private audience with Cadsuane, and also one was just coming out of the inn looking unhappy. It looks like they'd been talking to an Aes Sedai, but Moiraine couldn't see who, just a little bit of a shawl. She thinks that could mean one of two things. Maybe the men are potential warders, or maybe they're dark friends. Unfortunately, the inn is too full, and the innkeeper has had to shuffle things around so much that Moiraine has a bedmate now, a merchant who keeps telling her wild rumors about novice training in the tower, where everybody thinks Moiraine is supposedly bound. Moiraine can't sleep, worried about the Black Aja, and harried by her bedmate's sharp elbows, cold feet, and snoring. As promised, and as Moiraine had already forgotten about, Cadsuane bursts into the room to find Moiraine still there and holding almost enough power to burn herself out. If she had taken in just a hair more, she could have seriously injured or killed herself. So uh, Cadsuane just says, "Fool girl." She leaves, and immediately after she has passed that check, Moiraine decides it's as good a time as any to leave. She's not going to get any sleep anyway. So she only takes some of her belongings so as not to look too conspicuous, just all the stuff she can fit in her pockets and really nothing else, and slips out of there. And thus ends chapter 18, A Narrow Passage.
Right. Oh wow, this is one that kind of it did put me in the Halloween spirit. I will just say,
Oh, yeah.
I, because there are some creepy things going on here. First of all, to just see Siwan, how did Siwan find her? I mean, of course, she had the same list, um, but did she have to kind of travel the entire road that Moraine has traveled, just very quickly? Or did she just estimate, okay, she should be in Kanlun or Chichen here, so let me just check all the inns? We don't know. But
Yeah.
she's traveled all this way to meet up with Moraine, and it just had to be beside herself with worry because
Mm-hmm.
in her mind, see, she's had time to get used to this. The one unbelievable moment I think is when she's describing to Moraine, they're in the alley, which is a physical narrow passage they're in. Of course, they
Mm.
find themselves in
Yeah.
a kind of a moral narrow passage of whom do we trust and what do we do next.
Mm.
But in this physical narrow alley that they're in, oh, she begins to describe what happened, and Moraine automatically goes to Black Aja. Now, this is something that's been whispered about and rumored about, probably by the young accepted. And, as girls will talk, maybe novices, as girls will talk and gossip and think. Um, but it's something that's been denied. It's been denied for centuries. Something's
Mm.
been whispered about. How could any Aes Sedai become a dark friend? How could they be wooed over to the the side of evil that way? Or were they dark friends before they went to the tower, and so they just continued on with this? Um, the to me the entire presence of so many dark friends in the series, it used to seem a little odd, um,
Mm.
but because to us it has almost like a devil worshiping type feel to it,
Oh, yeah.
as far as the way they're described, and it's just a small group of people. Yet there seems to be a large group of people, and very a varied group of people within the story. And yet, I guess it would be more akin to a growing cult or a group of
Mm.
followers, because there, as we said before, there is no organized religion to compete with it.
Mm. That's a
Um,
good point.
but it's still at this point in the story, and at this point, where I would say Moraine and Siwan are both still a little bit immature in their views and things of the world. They jump to this conclusion very quickly, especially Moraine. As I said,
Mm-hmm.
Siwan's had a little more time to think about it, but it is the only thing that fits. with these sisters dying in mysterious circumstances, of course, bandits, being attacked by bandits on the road, or falling overboard a ship while it's at sea during a storm. But the list just goes on and on and on. And I think Moiraine is the one that gave a quote from her father: "Once was happenstance, twice might be coincidence, but thrice or more indicate actions of your enemies."
Mm.
And so, this many of the women dying all at once is coincidence enough. But when Moraine and Siwan know that all of these ladies are those who were in on the search, who knew about the Dragon Reborn, or at least they suspected that very strongly, they immediately went to Black Aja. And one part of me wants to say, hey, it should have taken longer for Moraine to buy into this idea when it's something that most most of the S of I won't even admit exists.
Mm-hmm.
Yet there is no other answer that fits. It's
Yeah.
too much to be coincidence, especially with the death of Malin and the way it went, and Siwan being the only one who knew about it.
Yeah.
It kind of puts you on edge. This reading through this chapter, it I wouldn't say scary, but it got a little creepy.
It
To
is.
think
Yeah.
these people hiding in plain sight there in the tower. So much going on.
I was just gonna say, I think Robert Jordan does a good job of writing tension into this story that just seems like it could be filler. Like, oh, I wonder what it was like back when Siwan and Moiraine were in the tower. But he does a good job writing tension into this story where we know
Yes.
that they're going to be okay at the end, our main characters. But I still manage to feel scared on their behalf
Yes.
at parts of the
Me as
story, and
well.
this is a
Yeah.
good example. And it
Yeah.
also makes me scared for any remaining searchers too. I sort of forget when I'm reading through this exactly how it resolves, because I'm like, clearly this Amerlin's a dark friend too. That's why she's friends across Aja suspiciously. Anytime you see somebody that's like, those two don't normally hang out, it's because they share a secret Aja usually.
Yeah.
um,
Yes.
so it makes me worry for the tower. It seems like a terrifying place to be right now, and just I'm scared for both of these women. I keep feeling like there's the danger is very real, that they're going to get called back to the tower somehow, or even killed before they can get there, even though I know better.
Right. Right. Yeah. Because again, he weaves us into the story. It's like we're a part of the pattern, as well as the people in the story. And I love that about this series. So even with the annoying Mistress Pellin, the rug merchant from Murandy, that just happens to be Moraine's unwanted roommate.
Mm-hmm.
For every big monumental thing in the story, there's going to be the small annoyance as well.
I know.
But in this point, you're right. The tension is probably the perfect word for that. Just you know they're going to be okay if you've read any more of the story, but you really begin to worry about them. You can put yourself in their place. What if I was this person at this age and not knowing what's going to come next?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what would that be like, and what would I face, and how would I react? And you feel like you're there making those decisions, reacting. So it becomes a little edgy, and I
Yeah.
love that about these chapters. They fit together. It's almost hard to distinguish between chapter 17 and 18. They flow together so perfectly in the story.
Yes, they're already running together for me as to what events happen in which
Yes.
one. I think it's interesting. Moiraine did briefly consider one alternative to the Black Aja, but she herself felt it was very flimsy. But I pulled a quote from this because it was so shocking. She said, "A red might kill a sister she thought intended to protect a man who could channel. It was possible." And I thought, what? That's a possibility you can think of, that a red Aja. I said I would actually kill another sister that she thought was protecting a male channeler.
Right.
I
And that
I wish we could
that
learn more about the red Aja, like from the inside, because if
yes.
she knows that that's a possibility, wow, the red is way more intense than I thought.
Right. Well, at least that's a possibility in Moraine's mind.
Yeah, I mean,
Again, I believe the
blue and red
oaths
have
would
always been at odds, so
oh yes.
maybe that's propaganda that reds do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I believe personally the oaths would prevent them from doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not supposed to take up the power and use it as a weapon, any of those things, and
Yeah.
except in the extreme defense of their own life. perhaps a red could, uh, in a twisted manner, justify any male channeler being a threat to their own life, but I doubt
Oh,
they could do it enough for the, could twist that far enough for the oaths to allow them to do it,
yeah.
or to take another life to get to that male channeler. But at least that was a possibility in Moraine's mind. It might be that there were things in the history of the Red Aja that had happened. And
Mm,
again, that we know now, looking back, that could have possibly been Black Aja. But perhaps there was something there that made people think anyway that the Reds could push the adherence to the oaths that far, could twist the logic far enough that would allow them to kill someone in order to get to a male channeler, even another sister.
hmm.
But that is hard to imagine.
Yeah. There were a few points of dramatic irony in this chapter, I think, and in the previous one. So at the end of the last chapter, or maybe it was the beginning of this one, again, they're starting to run together.
Yes.
Moiraine she was so shaken by this encounter with Cadsuane that she wished Siwan had been there to be able to steady her, and then that's when she sees her.
Yes.
But the irony is that Siwan is even way more shaken up because she's dealing with something way bigger than Cadsuane making her feel like a child.
Right.
So it was that much more shocking and upsetting, and we know something huge must be happening for Siwan to break down like that. So that was I did not expect this chapter to have all these kind of scary moments for our Halloween theme. Like I came up with other stuff from elsewhere in the series, but I'm already finding plenty
Yeah.
here. Like, oh no, if you know Siwan's crying, it's something really, really bad is going on.
Yes. Yes. She immediately had Moraine's attention when she broke down. Yes.
Yeah. But then there was another point of dramatic irony where Moiraine was wishing RJ was really laying it on thick here because Moiraine was thinking, oh, I wish I was a green sister and I had like 3 or 4 warders right now, thinking about all these threats after she became aware of them. But it got me thinking, Lan really does come into her life at such an auspicious time. Uh,
Yes.
I forgot just how bad things were looking for her at this point. I'd actually forgotten quite a bit of New Spring, I think, and I only read it like last year. um, but yeah, I think, wow, he shows up right in the nick of time because she needs a little more support ASAP.
Yes. Yes. Needs it. It was provided, and in fact, I think Lan probably needs someone in his life,
Oh
and we'll
yeah, he
get to that
does.
later in New Spring as
Yeah.
what all he goes through to bring him to that point. But for me, someone who would have, uh, turned and ridden the other way had he seen an Aes Sedai, to
Yeah.
someone who would willingly submit to one. There's a lot of changes that takes place in his life, but it's something that was needed and necessary for both of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think their pairing, we can talk about this a lot next episode and probably future ones, though. I think their pairing is a great example of a really strong non-romantic relationship
Yes.
but it's extremely intimate. The Warder Bond gets you to really explore non-romantic relationships that are extremely intimate in a way that feels safe, where I think none of us are thinking, oh, they're going to end up hooking up, because we
Right.
just know that that's not, neither of them are interested in that.
Right.
Whereas if there wasn't some magical Warder Bond, I think a lot of people would question that and think, oh, is it really possible for them to be this close and not get
Yeah.
together?
Yeah.
But I
Could
guess
it?
we have plenty more time to explore that later.
Yeah. Could it remain platonic? No.
Yeah.
Uh,
Did you have any other thoughts about this chapter?
no, I think we've covered everything. It's
Okay.
again not a lot of action, but man, it's so much fun to go
Yeah.
through these, to really look and break down what they're going through and how these girls feel, or women feel. I should not call them girls at this stage in their life, but these two honored Aes Sedai, and what they experience to become two of the most influential women in their time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's funny that you mentioned the way you refer to them, because I've been consciously making sure to say women a lot more after they actually gained the shawl, whereas I was
Yes.
freely saying girls before they went through the shawl test.
Yeah, yeah. We mature in our thinking along with them as they mature.
I think so. So I'm going to officially sign us out then, and then we can do our spooky part. Join us next time for episode 8, covering chapters 19 and 21, where we're going to analyze a fateful meeting between beloved main characters. You can find us now on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. You can also stay updated on Twitter at Lajara Sedai, Lajara or subscribe to our YouTube channel of the same name. Tell them bye, Giskell.
Bye, Giskell.
All right, great. So, Wheel of Time horror moments. Can you think of any that were not in this chapter? We actually found plenty. But yeah, what was your scariest moment or moments from the series?
And I had to think back on that um, because there were so many things. It's just so much tension brought into so many of the stories until we get to a chunk of books in the middle where it seems like the story drags. But up until that point, there's so much tension, there's so much drama, there's so many things that bring us forward. Yet the one thing that stood out in my mind was from chapter 10 of the second book, The Great Hunt, where uh, as Rand and the fellow travelers come to a town that has been just decimated, people killed, it's just been a slaughterhouse. It's been done intentionally to upset Rand because it's done by someone who hates him and is hunting him. And they kind of walk around the corner, and they're nailed to a barn door is one of the Fades, one of the Murdral, the half men, or as they're called in my country of Ilion, a lurch.
Mm.
Um, I think one of the reasons that is so horrifying to me, to find him nailed to the door that way, and obviously having been done so when he was alive, although he's dead at the point they find him in the story, is when we begin in book one, in the Eye of the World. We begin with Rand and Matt and Perrin each seeing one of the eyeless ones, and they're not sure what they saw. They see a man, and we see how the Murdral can disappear into the shadows. Of course, I believe at that point in time, their wives tell about them as they would turn sideways and disappear. It's like they were considered to be two-dimensional, just flat. If they turned sideways, you just couldn't see them. But the truth was, they just step into a shadow and they step out somewhere else in a way that even the Murdral cannot understand or know how it works. But they are so creepy to me. It's a little bit Count Dracula. It's a little bit, boogeyman. Your worst fears, because they are so undefined. They're so mysterious in the way they move and the things that they do. The way even if the wind's blowing, their cloak does not move in the wind. It's like they're really only halfway in this world anyway. And to draw a parallel, they are the ring raids of this world. And when I was a young man, those just became a fear of mine after reading The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
But in reading The Eye of the World and just how creepy these were described, and because at the earlier parts of the story, we don't see how they're killed, and we don't see how many of the things that happen when some of the great warriors overcome their fear and stand up against the Murdral. But for Padan Fane to have that kind of power, to take one of these feared half men, these creatures of the darkness, and nail it alive to a barn door, just to prove how sick and twisted he is, that he's willing not only to sacrifice an entire village of people, but also his own servants in such a horrible way. And then to have the power to do that creeped me out.
Yeah.
It should have been, I guess, the penultimate part was walking into the town and all the dead piled in the houses and the clouds of black flies. That should have been the horror. You feel like you can smell the death when Rand walks into the house, yet you walk outside and see this. It's just so much more chilling. And that's one of the things that always stood out in this story to me, is just being horrifying. And I guess because especially our introduction in The Eye of the World to just how creepy these creatures are and how otherworldly they are. And to see someone has this power over them was chilling.
Yeah, it certainly made me realize that oh, this is a darker story than I really like. The Great Hunt starts off very quickly with a lot of kind of gore, and already I'm like, wow, this is a little bit of a darker tone than the Lord of the Rings. You know, throughout the Eye of the World, you can see a lot of these parallels. Like, okay, yeah, the
Yeah,
Fades are kind of ring wraiths, and that's pretty creepy. But I've seen stuff like that before, and um, oh, you know, when they have to keep running through these different villages and trying to cross the water, it reminds me of them having to do that to leave the Shire and the Lord. You know,
yes,
it's very formulaic at points. And then when Moiraine is
right,
like, "Oh, we can't go there," you know, about Shatter Logoth, it's sort of like the Mines of Moria. But
right,
when you get to the Great Hunt, you're like, wow, this is not Tolkien anymore.
right,
And that
right,
the Fade is Pattern Fane nailing the Fade up is definitely the point, the tipping point of this is not the fantasy I thought it was. That's interesting. I've got to
right,
keep reading because this villain just got way scarier than the biggest, baddest villains I knew at this point.
right, right.
I like that you mentioned Fades being otherworldly because I've seen them talked about as being like um out of, if you were to think about it more in like Star Trek terms, I guess being a little bit out of phase with everything else around them.
Yes, yes,
Um,
that's it's been described that way.
mhm. And I think Robert Jordan doesn't shy away from the science fiction-y type stuff, like with the flicker flicker portal stone scene where Rand relives
Yes,
several lives, and thinking of kind of multiple universes or timelines and time travel and stuff. And we know Robert Jordan had a degree in physics, I'm pretty sure, so he didn't shy away from more of the science fiction-y type things. But so fades are creepy to me in that way because when I can put it in some kind of real world, it just feels more real to me. And so
yes,
it feels that
yes.
much more real that Pat and Fane could be scarier than one.
Part of it too is I guess the creepiness of the murder, all the fades, the lurches, is that you're still kind of tenuous as to what all they are, what all they
Mm-hmm.
do. You know, later we kind of begin to see them as flesh and blood. They can be decapitated.
Yeah.
They can be decapitated. They can be killed. But you know, at this point, there's still that unknown fear,
Yeah.
that boogeyman in the dark that you don't know what all it can do. But now we know there's somebody worse. And yeah, Jordan has always been masterful at scaring you with that which is not described, having the nameless fear uh, in parts of the story where it's necessary because our imagination is so much scarier than what he explains out in plain black and white. And yeah, he does that masterfully, and he does that at least the first parts of this story, the first couple of books with the Murderall, where later they're, you know, once you know they can be killed, you kill several of them, they're not as big a deal. But at this point, they're about as creepy as you're going to get
Yeah.
until Patton Fane, gets even creepier. So,
Yep. One of the things that I find scariest throughout the series is the idea that a dark friend could be anyone and you don't have a good way of figuring that out most of the time. And,
right, right,
you know, at first, yeah, it did feel like dark friends are kind of everywhere, but it worries me when you could think about they could be anyone that has spent any time off screen, you know, and then come back, and they could have been at the last dark friend social, who knows. So some of the, I have three moments that kind of tie together in a way, is this like
hmm
this fear of deep betrayal from somebody you could really trust. And one of them was pretty early, and especially in a first read through, you don't know where this is going to go. So after Matt gets the dagger from Shatter Logoth, and he starts getting a lot more paranoid and angry, and you know, obviously corrupted by it. At first, this
yes,
felt like, okay, it's, oh yeah, I get it. It's the One Ring, Matt's Gollum. Okay,
right,
um,
right,
but it started to take some different turns, and by the time they get to Camelin, where everybody had been separated, and then they meet back up, and Moiraine gets to see that he had the dagger for the first time. Um, First of all, we see how scary that dagger actually is. So this is a little bit aside from the betrayal, but this whole scene is really creepy to me. Um,
hmm
Moiraine hissed when she entered the room. Even with her Aes Sedai calm, she hissed when she enters the room and feels the evil coming off of that thing. Matt tries to kill
ah,
her,
yes,
and Lan stops him. But even before I think Moiraine entered the room, Matt was saying some really intimately hurtful things to everybody there, especially like Egwene and Nynaeve. He
Hmm.
was sort of
Yes.
picking out everybody's insecurities, and I'm like, oh
Hmm.
no, Matt's a dark friend now. Or so, I didn't really know what a dark friend meant that time the first read through. You don't
Right.
know what he's becoming and where this is going to go. But the fact that he said stuff that it's like he shouldn't have been able to know that. He saw Nynaeve for the first time since I don't know, it's probably been a couple of weeks on the road at least, and he sees
Hmm.
Nynaeve and starts to poke at the fact that she's having this thing with Lan, like, oh, Wisdom's not supposed to think of herself as an attractive woman, and how would
Yes.
he know about that? And he says some stuff about Egwene's, secret, the stuff she dreams about now, and maybe even something to Perrin that hints at his wolf stuff, but I'm not sure. But I was just very scared by Matt saying stuff that deeply hurtful to his friends like that he shouldn't have really necessarily known all those
Oh,
details.
right. And I guess I hadn't really picked up on the fact that he should not have known those things.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't like outright secrets, I guess, but it was just like, wow, I don't know that Matt's ever been that perceptive that he can just pull out people's insecurities like that. But I think it was maybe Mordeth does that because he was your kind of worm tongue character who would, get beside a
Right.
king and be that kind of creepy advisor. And so he was probably good at exploiting people's insecurities to gain influence with them. And so I think it was probably
Yes.
the Mordeth influence letting Matt immediately be able to absorb what he could exploit from them right away. And then
Right.
a couple of other creepy dark friend moments are when Ingtar confesses to Rand after everybody's kind of run away and they're trying to get the horn away from the Shan Chan or something. And
Hmm.
there's a lot of soldiers coming up behind them, and Ingtar realizes he's probably going to have to stay there and sacrifice himself. But he starts talking about what he did in Faldara, about how he let in the Gray Man, who then let out Padon Fane and was responsible for all this carnage they saw along the way. But
Ah.
just Rand talks about how as soon as Ingtar said the first line that sort of suggested that that's what he did, he was like, oh, I
Hmm.
didn't know who that little man was. I didn't know he was going to do all of this. I just opened the door. And then, he goes on this monologue about how the nations are dwindling and I just wanted to be able to save a little bit of Shinar. I thought maybe that I could negotiate with the shadow. And Rand talks about his hair on the back of his neck prickles up and he's like, what are you saying, Ingtar? And I kind of feel that along with him, even though it was obvious that Ingtar
Yes.
was something was weird about him for a while. I just felt uh, Rand's terror at being betrayed by somebody that close that seemed like you could really trust. The Shinarans are like always on the forces of the light, and you couldn't imagine one of them being a dark friend.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing because people who face the shadow every day, you think could not be swayed by it, could not be lured over to the dark side, so to speak.
Yeah.
And yet, just as anybody who's ever compromised in something, compromised in one small way, and the next thing you know, you continue and continue down that path until it's taking you somewhere you never dreamed it would take you. But that's exactly what's happened here. He compromised in a small way, and it kept luring him over until he was justifying what he had become and the choices he'd made.
Yeah. And similarly, my favorite dark friend reveal was Varen. Um,
Yes.
so that's another spoilers all, you guys, we warned you. So throughout the series, like in the Great Hunt, I think she was following around Rand because she got interested in this Taviran issue, and also knew that he was the dragon as well. Moiraine had
Yes.
disappeared somewhere to go learn more about the prophecies, and at the very end of the Great Hunt, Rand is like really mean to Moiraine and really pushing back
Hmm.
against everything she tries to say. He's like, you sent Varen to after me, and she said, I didn't send Varen. She did that on her own. When Varen had said with her Aes Sedai mouth, Moiraine sent me earlier in the book.
Ah,
So
yes.
that's our first clue that, whoa, something's not right here. I don't think we knew that the Black
Right.
Ajak had, could use the oath rod to like get rid of their oaths and make new ones. But it
Right.
got people thinking about Varen for a long time. And then her line to Egwene, your dress is green when she's wearing a white dress. Just that was the moment, because by then uh,
Yes.
we knew how the Black Aja worked. We knew they couldn't lie. And when she told a lie like that, I was terrified. I'm like, oh my gosh, Varen's been a part of this from the beginning. she
Yeah.
she guessed who the
And
dragon
and
was. Um, yeah,
yes, and what I guess is creepy about that to me is I had read about the first half of the series, maybe a little more, and then waited until all the books came out to reread. And so I've even though I've only read the entire story once, I've read the first 8 or 9 books twice, and I knew Varen was a dark friend, and yet it still caught me by surprise the second time
yeah,
because she pulls that off so well. I mean, this I always pictured her as a dumpy little grandmothery looking
yeah.
brown
Mm-hmm.
sister, and she does that image so well. It was just almost impossible for me to even go back and reread and realize, gosh, she's a dark friend this whole time. You just don't want to believe it.
Yeah,
And so the second time around, it still caught me by surprise because it's like my mind wouldn't remember that, wouldn't accept that, wouldn't hold on to that fact. And so here she, in my imagination, she's an ally again
yeah,
in the second read of the story, and then gets up so far and why did oh no, there's no way. But
yeah. Which she did end up being
yeah,
an
that was
ally. She
creepy.
was kind of, forced into either
Double agent.
becoming like a right, exactly. So, but when you look back on that, reading through her story again, you can kind of see, what is she doing. I think she's trying to avoid as many Black Aja orders as she can, just like being a little bit hard to find and going off and legitimately studying stuff that interests her. Maybe that's why she gets
Yeah.
away with sort of helping Team Dragon here and there. But she
Right.
probably
Right.
also does some dark stuff along the way. She's had to kill people. I'm sure that she's had to do stuff like that to keep people quiet. um, yeah,
Right.
she's a scary figure, but that moment was
You know,
especially
and
chilling.
yeah, and throughout the series, we find out there are a number of Black Aja sisters. In fact, more really than you would have suspected at first. Even this
Yeah,
part with when Moiraine and Siwan don't know who to trust, and they're assuming pretty much everybody around them is we find out really who is and who isn't. It's rather surprising how
yeah,
many have been turned to that. Of course, they were actively recruiting as well and forcefully recruiting in some situations.
yeah. Well, you were thinking about how hard it is to trust anyone, and it made me think of when we find out Shiriam is Black Aja. That was terrifying because she's been the mistress of novices forever, and
Yes,
uh, you just think about, oh, how many people she has access to be able to recruit. And Mirion, also Black Aja, mistress of novices.
yes.
So that's a position I think they like to appoint to when they can, because it seemed you would have a lot of influence.
Yes, it gives them a lot of influence on finding people with weaknesses that can be exploited because the young accepted often go to the mistress of novices, or excuse me, the young novices often go to the mistress of novices to pour out their heartaches, all the things they're going through that your shoulder they can cry on, as well
Mm-hmm.
as someone who deals out punishment. And yeah, that's someone who also knows a lot of the secrets that can be exploited to recruit them to their cause. Um, but yeah, with so many of the sisters turning out to be Black Aja, it kind of makes you see that perhaps a lot of the changes within the White Tower and the Amerlin seat have actively been forced by the Black Aja. I mean, I
Yeah.
believe they carried out a lot of deaths. Of course, you know, especially we're going back to Tamara, the way the former Amerlin just dies in her sleep, and when we now know that was probably not a natural death.
Mm-hmm.
You find out there's so many sisters who are part of the Black Ops, and it's kind of amazing when you look back and you see just how many have been influenced to turn this way, and there has to be a number of them in on it, just because so many sisters who pass away in these strange circumstances. Not only did they send some sisters out to carry out these murders, possibly a team of green along with their warders or something to go out and kill some in remote places. But when they have a sister who quote unquote dies in her sleep in the tower, as we see the Amerlin Tamara Espana does, and as we see Myelin does. And of course, Siouan is the only one outside the Black Aja who knows that that was just, that was murder. They've also got to infiltrate the Yalo, who will come in and do
Yes.
the autopsy basically,
Mm-hmm.
and come right out and say, well, I can't find any evidence of any foul play. Or they've got to have some very gifted sisters in healing who can heal someone of the wounds and the torture they've been going through right before they kill them in some other manner
Oh,
that the Yalo
yeah.
don't see. But there's got to be a lot of craftiness there. But they have to have people in very powerful, influential places throughout the White Tower in order to pull this off.
Yeah. You mentioning the announcement about Tamra's death reminded me of a fact that I had known but came across again in between last week's episode and this one. Rima Galfrey was the Yellow who had announced Tamra's death, and
Yes.
she was later captured and made Damani by the Shanchan. She was
Ah,
the
yes.
one. She was the one who begged Egwene to remember her name because they try to brainwash your own name out of you, even.
Right.
And
Take that out of you. Yes.
yeah. So that's especially chilling. I did a little bit of that. Where are they now? And looked her up, and yeah, her ending was not good.
No. Well, yeah. In fact, while we're on creepy things, the
Mhm.
entire thing of the Seanchan collaring the women, that is
Yeah,
particularly horrifying
it
when
is.
you really stop and think about it. And so many of the sisters were not rescued. There's some few were.
Yeah.
There were some other domain who were rescued who didn't want to be. They were so brainwashed from the training they didn't want to return to a normal life, which is
Hmm.
I guess Stockholm syndrome,
Yeah.
taken to the 10th degree. But um, yeah, it's chilling to think of the sisters that they were taken back away over the seas, and they've got this horrifying life, half life, whatever you want to call it, to look forward to for decades, centuries.
Yeah.
Uh, and I mean, it even overrides the oath rod. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the amazing things about it, that not only can the oath rod be used to, turn back or turn off the oaths, so to speak, but the collar can override them. The oaths are still there,
Yeah.
but the
I
collar
mean,
basically just overrides it, and
it must have
it's
to.
beyond their control at that point.
Right, right. Because it's not like it's them violating the rules. It's really like the Suldam doing it through them. So I think that's how you get
Yes,
around to the oath rod. Because otherwise, I said
right.
I would be useless, Damane. I don't think they would even bother collaring
Yeah,
them. Well, I mean, they would, I guess, because they think of them as wild and like they need to be. It's so
right.
awful and dehumanizing. We, like you said, a
Yes,
many that Aes Sedai get captured and become Damane, and we don't hear from them. They just don't get rescued. Elida was actually one of those ultimately, which is one of those things where you kind of wish her to get some sort of revenge for being such an incompetent, terrible leader, just awful
right,
person. And then you're like, no, 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 that's not what I meant. No, not that.
right. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
Nobody deserves
Death.
that.
Yeah, right. Dead would be better, and that's true.
Yeah,
Dead would be better than that type of slavery.
yeah. This I know you probably have to go in just a few minutes. I have a quick
Yes, I
correction to
do.
make, or not exactly a correction, but we got some feedback from a
Hmm.
listener on Twitter who listened to, I guess, one of our first episodes. This is Lude Theron from Twitter. Yeah, he stays in character and only tweets lewd stuff. Usually, it's pretty funny.
Ah,
So Lude Theron from Twitter says that he interpreted Elida a little bit differently than we did. So I thought it would be cool to
mhm.
introduce that perspective quickly. So
Yes,
he interpreted Elida's interest in Moiraine. So we kind of saw that as maybe she wants to bring out the best in these potentially strong, um, accepted, and kind of bring them up to her standards. He also saw her interest in Moiraine specifically as maybe being related to the Sun Throne. So even though Elida's interest in Siwana Moiraine started um, way before Moraine's uncles died, maybe Elida, since she was already going to position herself to serve the Queen of Andor, was thinking, oh, here's somebody who would know the royalty in Kyrian and we could be great
ah,
allies. And
yes.
that blew my
The
mind a little bit.
political as well as, yes, yeah,
Yeah.
political influence as well as just influence in the power.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
intriguing. I had never considered that. Of course, I think he needs to stay out of our business and get his own podcast, but no, I'm joking.
yeah, so
That
I was
is very
trying to figure
perceptive.
out where Siwan fit in that though, because I'm like, well, she really liked picking on Siwan too, but maybe, Moiraine talked about Siwan being the natural leader of the two, so Elida might have seen
Right.
political potential in her as well.
Right. And just like you see many of the sisters in the tower who are older, some I think were actual biological sisters. Sometimes you couldn't have one without the other, so to
Yeah.
speak. And this is the way Moraine and Siwan had come up through the tower, and I believe everyone expected them to continue that close friendship, throughout their careers as Sedai. And of course, we know unfortunately that does not happen,
Mhm.
but we all know it should have, just because
Yeah.
close friends should always remain that close.
Yeah. I know I've been cutting it close on time, so did you have anything else you wanted to say before we wrap up?
That's all I've got. Happy
Okay.
Halloween, everybody, and
Yeah.
happy reading in the world of time.
All
World
right.
of time.
No, that
Happy
works. It
reading in the
works.
wheel of time.
I'll talk to you later. Love you.
Love you, baby. Bye.
Bye.